Hello, everyone, and welcome episode 8 of Seed Speaks. My name is Ashley Robinson, and I am the editor of the Alberta Seed Guide, and today I'll be acting as your host. We're here to discuss the return to business travel as we move into this post-pandemic world. I know everyone's super excited about it, so I have a few guests here from the seed and agricultural world to discuss it with me. So thank you to Bryan Gerard, Brent Collins, and Jennifer Crouse for joining us today. To those watching, please don't hesitate to ask any questions you may have for our guests in the chat box. And let's start with getting to know our panelists. So Bryan, if you could please tell me a bit about where you work and what your company does.
Yes, I'm co-owner and president of JoMar Seeds and Gerard Seed Solutions. Gerard Seed Solutions is a secondary business. We mainly do projects for international companies who are trying to access North America, really the US. And then JoMar is our wheat licensing company, and we're the lead wheat licensing company in North America.
Cool. And Brent, could you tell me a bit more about yourself?
Yeah, hi everyone. So Brent Collins, I'm the head of our canola seeds business for North America at BASF Agricultural Solutions. I'm based in Calgary, Alberta.
Thank you. And last but certainly not least, Jennifer, can you tell me about yourself?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Jennifer Crouse. I'm the Senior Director of Meetings and Services for the American Seed Trade Association based in Alexandria, Virginia.
Okay, awesome. Thank you guys so much for joining. And as you can see, we have such a great and interesting, diverse group. So first off, this one will tie into, of course, what Jennifer will talk about. But Bryan, I heard you attended ASTA's Policy and Leadership Development Conference in June. And I know for a lot of seed industry folks, that was their first in-person meeting in a year and a half. So how did you handle attending it, feeling safe, and what were your process for going to it?
Well, the easy answer is I obeyed what Jennifer told us to do. But no, on a serious note, it's just a matter of preparation. You know, being fully vaccinated gave me a little more freedom. I felt that ASTA did a great job providing the information beforehand. It was very detailed. It wasn't complicated in the way they laid it out. So just reading that, seeing what was going to happen, not be caught off guard by temperature, understand we had our own tables, you know, playing that respect card, I thought was very, very important. And then also looking at the city guidelines. You know, actually one restaurant we went to required a mask, others did not. So just having some of those advanced knowledges, I think, made it more relaxed, and it made it very simple. I think the other piece was how to deal with individuals. You know, that was the hard part. Like, okay, who wanted to be greeted, who didn't? I'm pretty outgoing, and so I didn't want to just, you know, come up forward and shake hands or give a big hug with people I hadn't seen in person for a while. And, you know, one ASTA made that a little bit easier, but also you just had to read the cues. And sometimes you just asked, you know, so that preparation and taking advantage of the information that was given to me really made it easy. And I'm not saying that because Jennifer's on here, but ASTA did a phenomenal job of providing the information in advance. So when you're not caught off guard, you're a lot more relaxed. And I would encourage that to anyone who starts traveling and meeting at workshops or meeting at conferences again. Just follow the guidelines, understand them, and ask questions.
Yeah, and then of course that plays into you're really saying how prepared Jennifer and the rest of the ASTA team was. So Jennifer, how did you guys approach planning that event to make your attendees like Bryan feel comfortable attending?
Well, it was an evolving situation as we planned it. We opened registration in March of 2021, and the conference was in June. And over those couple of months, all of the restrictions, excuse me, were changing as we were registering people. So we had initially posted one set of safety protocols, which for the most part stayed intact the whole time. But over the course of the couple of months people were registering, the mask guidance changed according to the official restrictions for Washington, D.C. And then a few days after that, Hyatt Hotels and Resorts, which was our host hotel, also followed suit to not require masks of people that were fully vaccinated. So we did have to change some of our protocols even as we were registering people, but out of respect for people that had originally registered in March, we also had to clearly communicate to them that what you first read is now a little bit different because the government restrictions have changed. So you can't just change your protocols and not let people know in case they might have only registered under that original understanding. So we went over to the hotel twice and revised the meeting space location in the hotel twice in order to have a larger space to be able to lay out the room with one person per 6-foot table. I also got certified during the process as a pandemic compliance advisor so that I could make sure that we were doing absolutely everything we should be doing for our duty of care for our registrants. And part of that includes communicating right up front. As Bryan said, as people were registering, they were able to review a COVID waiver that we asked them to agree to, as well as the code of conduct once you got there. And then we did have a robust series of protocols in place, including wellness kits for each attendee. As I mentioned, assigned seats for one person per table, and also a card when you got to your table that people could write their name on their table and say, this is exclusively my spot for the next 3 days. And people were asked not to change tables once they claimed their spot and they were given a table number to go to. We had temperature checks. We had a new chat bot we were using for a daily self-help assessment. So people could continually monitor themselves each morning, how they were feeling. If they had any new symptoms, they were asked not to come downstairs to the meeting space. And everyone always had that virtual option if they suddenly weren't feeling well to be able to still participate. We also, I think it's important to make sure you're using a facility that's a GBAC Star accredited hotel. GBAC is the Global Biorisk Advisory Council, and lots of hotels around the country are certified now to meet their standards for health and safety. So that was part of it too.
Yeah, you said a lot of interesting stuff. I just learned so much myself. It's really reassuring to hear that associations like yourself who are planning these events, one, have people like yourself that are now pandemic response trained, and then also that hotels have these responses in place. It makes myself feel a lot of comfortable when hopefully I attend my first new event in a few months or whenever it does happen, which I feel leads into the next thing. Both Bryan and myself are based up here in Canada. So we're just seeing Brent, not Bryan, to maybes. Brent are based up here in Canada, and we're just seeing the start to a return of announcement of in-person events. So Brent, as someone based here in Canada, how are you handling the return to in-person events for yourself attending?
Yeah, thanks, Ashley. It's a great question. I think as an agricultural solutions company, much like Bryan and Jennifer, it's on the panel here listening today. It's an exciting time for us. BASF was considered an essential service throughout this pandemic, and I think and that's something that I think we forget, that agriculture really. On an office front, there were perhaps some people that were impacted, but out in the field, to a large extent, activities were ongoing. And I think, the dedication of our employees in operations who continued to work on the seed side, if you look at seed production facilities or on production sites, these people kept working throughout the pandemic. We were forced to move quickly and adjust for people that were office-based to work remotely. But I think in order to be able to keep the industry going in 2021, it's truly admirable, the work of the employees in the industry. On the Canadian side specifically, Ashley, I think as Health Canada and local public health guidelines start to relax here in the country, including the use of masks and social distancing, if you're fully vaccinated, people are starting to come back to the offices now, and travel's starting to open up again, business travel specifically. And I think I've seen a change here in the last couple of weeks where we're starting to see people move around a little bit more. As I mentioned, I'm based in Calgary, and today I'm speaking to you from Saskatoon, where we were on a field tour yesterday. We had customers here last week as well. So it's a pretty exciting time, and I think indicative that things are starting to move again. And I think people are starting to become more and more confident that safety is still being adhered to. So this is, I think we're ready to go. I think certainly still protocols in place to make sure that travel is monitored to ensure the safety of our employees. But I think we're, as I said, in the last couple of weeks, starting to see people move again.
And yeah, of course, I feel that that leads into both for a question for Brent and Bryan, because you guys do oversee staff. So how are you addressing your staff with their wanting to travel, or are you seeing any hesitancy? So how are you working with your staff to make sure they feel safe going back to fields and seeing clients and everything?
You know, Ashley, I think it's a great question. I'm really curious to hear Brent's answer because, you know, two totally different corporate structures. So we're a small, independent, family-owned company versus, you know, the concept of a large corporation or a multinational. We really, you know, besides being more cautious, being more intelligent, being more aware, we haven't had issues with people wanting to go back on the road. We actually stayed on the road the entire time. The first 2 months of COVID, we didn't travel just because it was so unknown. And then we made adjustments, like for another month or two, we didn't stay in any hotels. We packed all of our own food. We didn't do any flying. So we made those adjustments. And now we're at this stage, you know, we're just aware, you know, we make sure that, hey, you know, if you got plenty of things to wipe your hands, make sure you stay clean. Whatever you're comfortable with is great, what you're not comfortable with. And then we're very cognizant of our customers and their reactions. I did notice our Eastern-based customers were much more intentional on, we didn't meet in the office. When we did meet out in the field or in the research trials, they kept their distance. In the Midwest, you know, it was a little more lax and kind of depended on the size of the company and the corporate structure and how that worked. And that included all the way through this summer. But I will say, between last summer and this summer, every in-field appointment we made, they showed up. The customer did show up. They wanted to meet. And I saw one of the questions pop up that I think is a question I'm actually looking forward to answering. We are, you know, we also leave it up to each of the employees. You know, what are you comfortable with? Where, you know, what hotel chain do you feel comfortable with? You know, where you choose to eat is where you choose to eat, how you choose to do that. And we have to trust, you know, that wise decisions are made. And being an independent, family-owned company, you know, we just say use common sense, you know, and that has really worked both out of the office and in the office as it applies to JoMar.
And Brent, what do you want to add? Because of course, Bryan said you guys are two different kinds of companies, a really big one or a really little one. So how are you guys handling this return?
Yeah, great point, Bryan. I think BASF's return to the workplace, including business travel, I would say follows an inclusive and an empowered approach. You know, one where employees at all the levels across the organization are involved in building what the new BASF will look like. So the pandemic has really forced us, if you will, to adhere to those two elements, both inclusiveness and empowerment. I think the pandemic in general has really taught us a lot about what is possible. It's also highlighted some of the things that make the ag community in general very, very special. When I look back to some of the major events that typically would occur over the planning period, the last, say, 18 months, it's really extraordinary, I think, to think what's really been accomplished. And if I can just pick one example, Ashley, in the Canadian landscape, that's the formation of Seeds Canada, which is a newly formed organization that focuses on the seed industry in Canada. We just had our AGM, our first AGM, a couple of weeks ago, and so we know that the virtual platform works. That particular AGM was an overwhelming success. So I think we're going to now talk a little bit about what a hybrid looks like, you know, continuing on with the virtual, you know, model, but also highlighting people are anxious to get back face to face and have these so-called water cooler discussions.
Yeah, and I think that's a great lead into a question we've got from the audience. And I think I'll start with Jennifer answering this because it came in during her speaking about how ASTA handled their conference they had in June. So what was it like building a hybrid virtual / in-person conference? And what do you think made it successful, especially when some speakers weren't able to attend in person?
Sure. Well, yeah, we had about half and half in person and virtual attendees in June. And one thing that was noticeably different in planning it was the need for very, very detailed pre-planning of the audiovisual aspects of it to a granular level, much more specific than I have done in the past for an in-person event. We set up the conference as though it was a television broadcast, and we had an anchor desk on stage, and for the most part, a consistent MC the whole time. Our president and CEO served as the anchor man, so that the virtual viewers could feel some consistency and feel like they're in the right place from one session to the next. But it was very elaborate between the on-site AV team and the virtual AV team to make sure that the right signals were going to the right screen or out to the live stream. About 1/3 of our speakers were live speakers and most were virtual. And so it was pretty complicated making sure that what the audience saw in person on screen made sense for what was going on at the time versus what the virtual audience saw. But they did a beautiful job. I couldn't be more proud of our AV partners, who are the same ones we've used for years. It was very seamless. And one thing that I thought was funny was it was more important than ever that the in-person attendees take their seats at the right time. They were all wanting to chit chat in the aisles and sit down, and maybe we can start 3 or 4 minutes late like we always did before. And I had the team start making announcements like 3 minutes to broadcast. And I said, use the word broadcast so that people understand that we have to stay on time for the sake of the virtual viewers. So that was kind of fun. And I think the audience had a good time feeling like they were the live studio audience of our ASTA television show.
Yeah, that's a good way to think of it as a broadcast and everything, because I feel definitely it adds an immediacy. Having worked in news as a editor, I know when you're hearing the words like live broadcast and stuff, it just adds the immediacy. Or even today when we were waiting to go live for this Facebook Live, I'm sure you guys had that bit of immediacy and like, okay, gotta be all ready to go. And we have another question from the audience, and I think this one will maybe be for all of you because we all have to do meetings. So do you think all virtual meetings like Zoom business meetings can ever replace that in traveling / in-person aspect of business, or is it like a hybrid world that we're moving into in this post-pandemic life?
Ashley, I think it's probably going to be a hybrid going forward. I'll answer it on respond to it on 2 levels. You know, corporately, we're going to go see our customers face to face. That is the best way to do business. And I think one of the keys, with at least in the seed industry and what we do, there's a friendship aspect to that also comes across in that meeting that you know we want to participate in. It enriches our life. We think, obviously, we hope it enriches the customer's life too. And if we're going to go see our customers, then our competitors are going to go see the customers, because you're not going to allow the competitor to have that advantage. And so I think company to company will still exist face to face. Internal, I don't know. You know, just yesterday we had a strategy meeting. We did it in person. We traveled to Indianapolis and met there. There's others we've done where we now won't travel just for the day. We'll just do it virtually. And so from that aspect, I think the hybrid internally is going to be more valuable than externally. It is going to help though in the global business, you know, whereas before you maybe, you know, we went to ISF, or maybe you made one trip to Europe or one trip to South America a year. Now you're going to visit with them more often face to face, which is much better. And phone call, the technology is better. You know, now we know how to show a PowerPoint, we know how to show data. So we'll do that. You know, as for attending conferences, I think it's a real dilemma for associations. Matter of fact, I think Brent was on the reception. The last part of the AGM was the reception. We actually got into this conversation. What does it look like going forward? How did it change involvement? How did it change who was involved? You know, at the ASTA level, I'm sitting there thinking, you know, there are some members, if they change, you know, how they do things, or they want to get more of their company involved, there may be a demand to ask, hey, you've done a great job with virtual. We want to keep that option available. Now, is it a live option? Is it a after the conference option? You know, something where you could, in the past, you could still go see the seminars. You know, I don't know what that'll look like. I do believe, though, in attending, as great as the AGM was, and it really was, Brent is right, it was a phenomenal experience to do it virtually, including the reception, which came off without a hitch, with casual conversation and business conversation. I did think being in person at ASTA, yes, it was new again, and you were excited, but there was an element to it that brought about a camaraderie that is crucial to an industry moving issues forward, where we have to be partners for the industry, even though we're competitors out in the business environment. And I think if we totally escape that face-to-face and really encourage it, we're going to lose that aspect. So I encourage both, any association I'm in. Hybrid's up to you, may be demanded, but don't give up on the face-to-face.
Brent, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah,
of course,
there's not,
Canada.
Yeah, there's not much to add. Brian nailed it. I think this concept of hybrid is incredibly intriguing for people. I like the delineation between internal and external meetings. The challenge that I think still sits in front of us is the hybrid model. When you have 70% of the people in the meeting room, 30% externally online, it's very, very easy to forget about the people that are online. And so I'm not even sure that the technology is there yet, how we will include the people online when there's a large group in a room. But that's an opportunity for us moving forward. But I truly concur that the word hybrid is going to be more and more prevalent in our future.
And Jennifer, of course, you guys already did a hybrid event. You guys plan events, but you're also an association yourself who would be having board meetings and stuff. So what do you want to add to this conversation?
I also agree with what Brian said. I agree also with what Brent said. For our virtual attendees in June, we had a way for them to interact and ask questions directly to the phone of the moderator on stage, but we found that they didn't take that opportunity. And we found that last year with our larger virtual, 100% virtual conferences as well. So I think one lesson learned is to not just make sure you're not forgetting about the virtual audience, but have someone assigned that is actually prompting them to engage, because it's very easy for them as well to just sit back and be passive viewers and not take part when they have the tool right at their fingertips to do so. So that part is two-way, but I do think that the seed industry is a very face-to-face business. We've been hearing a lot of pent-up demand from our members who can't wait to get back to Chicago. We had some members last year who refused to participate because it was 100% virtual. Because there's the old saying, you can't see eye to eye unless you meet face to face. And they're really eager to get back together again in Chicago. And I think we were lucky in a way that our June conference is much more educational and policy focused, where our networking oriented conventions, which are December and January, are very, very hard to replicate in the virtual world, as we saw last year when we went 100% virtual. So no, I don't think Zoom or virtual will ever replace the in-person, but I do think there are certain cases where that will be replaced for internal meetings or board meetings. But from the ASTA perspective, we're already planning to convene our board in person in September, unless any restrictions change between now and then. And I think it's important also to just note that virtual allows you to reach a wider audience. And sometimes that's a wider audience that could have been left behind before, whether it's somebody who can't take the time off of work for their own personal or childcare reasons, or a student who can't miss their final exams, or an employee who can't get the travel funding, or simply an introverted person who wants to just do the education and not the networking. That's a whole broader audience that we can continue to reach now. And these tools have been available for years, but they've only just been forcibly embraced in this past year. So it kind of opens up a whole new world.
Yeah, I was gonna say, as a writer and everything, I personally have been able to attend a lot of conferences I don't think I would have been able to attend in the last year because of the virtual aspect. So I am interested to see how associations like yourself and groups and companies handle a hybrid events moving forward, because I think that will be a challenge, as all of the issues that you guys have raised that we're still doing, but we are getting better. So hopefully it continues getting better. We're just about nearing our end of our time slot, but is there anything else that you guys want to say that came out of this discussion?
Maybe just a comment, I think, and it applies to all of our organizations. I think it's the health and safety of our employees and their families, our customers, our communities continue to remain our focus, and we're going to guide that recovery plan as we prepare for the return of, going back to the office or getting on an airplane. But I think health and safety are absolutely going to be top of mind for the ag industry.
Yeah, I would support that with Brent. We're going to be intentional about, yes, there are things that are reopened, but we're not going to push that envelope ahead of where the reality of the situation is. One last thing, Ashley, in regards to the meeting, you mentioned you could attend more. I attended more state or local meetings that I could never go to in the past because I had to do business. And so I'll be curious to see if not the national ones, but if the local, state, or regionals will now look to go more and more Zoom only or technology only, because they'll get more engagement and it might be good for their business, from a budget perspective. That'll be one I'm interested to watch.
Jennifer, anything you'd like to say?
I would just like to echo the sentiment that safety is the top priority. And while there is a lot of pent-up demand to get back together again in person, it's also still an evolving situation, as we're now planning for our December event, which is our largest event of the year, 10 times as big as our June event. So it's much more daunting to try to plan for health and safety protocols for an event that size. And we've already had some people expressing concern about, will ASTA require vaccinations of people because I'm not coming if you do? And I'm sorry, but that kind of spirit is not the spirit of safety for everyone that we're going for. So that has to be paramount in everything that we do. But we're working on redesigns and lots of modifications to the event. And at this point, after a year and a half of this, I'm used to my contingency plan A through D. And we're ending up somewhere in B and C, and we'll see how we go. But I think everyone needs to remember that the only way forward is for everybody to help take care of everyone else. So I think that's really important at the bottom line.
Definitely. Well, thank you guys so much. That's all we have time for today. So thank you to Bryan, Brent, and Jennifer for being here. I really enjoyed this discussion. I learned so much, and you guys had so many great insights. For those watching, thank you for tuning in. And if you missed part of today's live stream, don't worry, we'll have it available on demand on Facebook and YouTube. And if you have any questions about this subject or ideas for future topics we will tackle, please send a message to Seed World's Facebook page, or feel free to shoot me an email. Next week on Seed Speaks, Sonia Begeman will be hosting a discussion on how do you craft an offer potential employees cannot say no to. We hope you'll join us then. Thanks, and see you next week.